me show these suckers how to ball out here. Oh, man, let's get this together here. Oh, layup. Oh, shot. Oh, three. Oh, it's like Brick City out here. Mid-range. Oh, my goodness. I can't buy a bucket out here. I missed the whole damn basket. Oh, my goodness. What's going on, man? My game is looking trash. Oh, here we go. Black Power Media shirt. Now we cooking. Trees. I'm taking on 3 of y'all with these right here. Between the legs. Oh, my goodness. Behind the back. Layup. Oh, did he just do a reverse? He is in beast mode out here. I ain't got to look. It's falling. Oh, my goodness. This guy is going 3, 2, 1. Kobe. Nice. Black Power Media, baby. Nice. Empower yourself. Go get you some of that Black Power Media again. Right here, blackpowermedia.org. Yeah.
Saturday
with Renee. I know it's not supposed to mess up the intro, but I can't stop laughing every time
I was just thinking, are we ever going to get to a place where we don't giggle?
Nah. I love it too much. And the show's only once a week, so it doesn't wear out. So anyway, welcome everybody. Another Saturdays with Renee Johnston, Jared Ball. Welcome everybody back to BPM. Please like, share, subscribe, join the platform, support. All the links are in the show description. Do what you can to put this in your socials. Do all the good things. We have a lot to get to. Renee, I'll turn it over to you if you wanted to say anything, any prefatory remarks or whatever.
How many is it? Is it still? Did anyone else come?
So we got we have 2 guests. No, 3 now. We have 3 guests are here. So I think only one. I think somebody's confused about their participation today, but we do have 3 of the 4 guests ready. I
didn't do my typical send me bios because I was really excited that everybody said yes. And so I was like, yeah, let's do it. But what we'll do is just let the audience know before people start to come on that after watching EYL, which was the post-show and the pre-show to our show last Saturday, because of the timing with us having to pre-record, I really started thinking about what is the responsibility of those of us who have chosen to be seen on these YouTube streets. And I really wanted to talk to some people who I feel, who I watch all the time and who I feel like I get a lot of information from. So let's just bring on who's here.
Okay.
And then I am going to go rogue because I do want to talk a little bit about this IJC case.
Okay.
ICJ
and
before we get
I think all of that fits within the responsibilities. We welcome our guests, and I'll let 2 Black determine when he's ready by turning on his camera. But there we go. What's up, everybody? Welcome. Good to see you all.
Morning. And let me make sure.
Peace.
Let me make sure Piper knows we on East Coast time.
Yeah, she was on Twitter earlier talking about she was excited to watch, and I was like, watch. You on the show, fool. But I'm not sure if that resonated.
All right, well, I just sent her a text, so let's see what happens. Good morning, people. Good morning. Thank you very, very, very much. I appreciate the time. And I know 2 Black, you have a time constraint. You said you only have about an hour, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, if something changes, I'll let you know. Like longer.
Brother, do what you got to do. I was just glad you caught the email and said yes. All right, Piper's on her way. So instead of doing my normal reading everybody's bio, if folks don't mind, if you could tell everybody where what you represent, what your show is a little bit about yourself, and then we're gonna really just get into it. And why don't we start with Rakeem, since you're right next to me on the screen? We're just gonna go that way.
No problem, no problem. First off, peace to everybody on the panel. Definitely thank you for the invite. I have a show called Wild's the Dome TV, where I it's an interview style podcast where I interview people through all aspects of political thought, Black culture, Black history, science, the arts. And so, I've had everybody from the cast of EYL on to Dr. Horn, you know, Brother Jay from X Clan, and a lot of grassroots organizers that you may not ever heard of. And I just try to have conversations that are meaningful, especially in a crowded YouTube space where there's a lot of grifting, a lot of misinformation going on. So I just strive to be an alternative to that. So again, I appreciate everybody on the panel, and definitely appreciate the invite.
Too Black, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm go by Too Black, host of the Black Myths podcast. We take myths prominently said about Black people and debunk them, myths of a socio-political nature. So yeah.
Right on.
An author of the forthcoming Laundering Black Rage, among others, right? I mean, let's not shorten the bio too much now.
Right. And he's got Panelist too in his
Panelist 2 documentarian. I mean, come on, like let's not be. I know you're comfortable around here, but let's not do too much now. Let's not go too far.
I just prefer to get to the conversation. All
right. Well, all right. Okay. All right. Well, my bad, Jared. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, not at all. I appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, Too Black does a lot of great work. So I think that's important to note. At first, just thank you for the invite. And it's really an honor to be on panel with Too Black and Rakeem and hopefully Piper. Also, Renee and Jared, of course. I really appreciate this show and the other work that you all do on BPM and elsewhere. So I'm a co-host and producer of podcasts, Millennials and Capitalism. We recently have added doing some YouTube stuff, so that's fairly new for us. Primarily I would say, like, when we started, Josh and our interest was in doing anti-capitalist podcast work, but not really being in like what we saw a lot of at that time in 2017 was like Bernie Sanders-ish kind of vein of quote unquote anti-capitalism. And we really wanted to look at histories of anti-imperialists organizing, whether that's Black liberation movements, and stuff around the world too, just like, and so we have a big range of different things, from interviewing, movement elders and veterans of struggle to, authors and academics. And there's a lot of different stuff that we do, but that's the kind of through line is for us is usually anti-imperialism.
So I don't know if everybody saw the EYL last week, and JD Signifier jumped on. And I will preface this by saying I have no intentions of mocking FD. I said JD, my bad, FD Signifier. No, this is not about picking at him or anything. I actually really like his channel. And I feel like, oh, I'm getting an echo of myself on my computer. So, and I feel like he does a good job with what he does. The reason I like him as much as I do is because he is honest with what he does, right? Part of my issue with a lot of channels and podcasts is that they are presenting themselves as this thing.
And I'm sorry, Renee, you meant FD, right? You talking about FD,
FD,
not JD,
yes,
right? I think there's some confusion. Okay, sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Sorry about the confusion, FD. And so he's very clear about what he does, right? He said it very clearly on the show. I'm an entertainer. He said a lot. And it got me really to thinking about what the role is that these shows play, right? because he said some very interesting things in that conversation, which was really off the cuff, right? Like he just jumped on because he was in the chat and he knew that he had come up in the conversation. So Jared, on our Saturday sheet is a few timestamps because I feel like there's a conversation that needs to be had about what the role is that we're playing, right? Like what exactly is the overall intention for when we do these things? So I can tell you, for me, this was not on my bingo sheet, right? Like Saturdays with Renee was literally not on my bingo card. I had no plans on doing it. It wasn't something I was thinking about doing. I was jumping on with Jared every now and again to talk about Cornel West and what was going on with the Green Party and third party politics. And, you know, it kind of morphed into this thing because Jared and I just got along, right? And the conversations went well and the chat was seeming to enjoy like our discourse and the way we went back and forth. And we had a way, unknowing, like totally unplanned, we literally, and we still do it, like we just kind of roll through the topics that are on the Saturday run sheet, and it's not planned. Like it's not like we're like, okay, we're gonna do this first and then this second, and then it's literally, hey Piper,
peace everyone.
It's literally us just kind of like rolling through. So I want us to talk about all of those things. But before we do, I want Piper to introduce herself. And then 2, I want us to just very quickly, before we jump into the YouTube podcast space, I'd like everybody to give some feedback on if they're watching this ICJ trial, like, you know, this madness that's happening. If anybody watched Israel's response to South Africa, I'd like, just because I feel like it would be wild for us to do this the day after those 2 things happened and not talk about it at all. So first, Piper, can you tell everybody, just introduce yourself and tell everybody quickly like what your show is about, and then we can talk about ICJ for a few minutes before we roll into the real show topic.
So peace everyone, peace to the chat, peace to all the Black Power Media ecosphere. So I'm Piper Carter, and I'm honored to have a show here on Mondays, 8 p.m. Eastern, called Beyond Breaking Barriers, and we center women in hip hop. But I do media creation, if you will. I do photography, video production, and a podcast.
So oral arguments started this week, and South Africa went first on Thursday, and they presented basically the verbal version of what they talked about in their 84-page report that they initially submitted. Israel responded on Friday. I'm still trying to get through Israel's response. I'll be honest. I'm really having a hard time like listening to it. What are y'all thinking? What were your thoughts? Did anybody watch all of it? Let's kind of hash it out for a little bit.
I've not seen Israel's response. Go ahead. Yeah, Jared. Sorry, I just wanted to say that part. Go ahead. Yeah.
I haven't watched the whole thing, but I have watched sections of both, you know, South Africa's presentation and Israel's. I mean, I think just the thing that stood out to me among Israel's is that it's propaganda, like quite openly. And so it's interesting to see in a legal environment, even though I know the ICJ does not have the ability to actually like sanction or impose penalties, as I understand it, that, you know, there's no interest in, you know, that I guess I would say it's disrespectful of what I think of as legal or court arguments, in that there's seems to be no requirement or desire on their behalf to present evidence that's based in any kind of fact. So, which is not unusual to how we've seen their propaganda since October 7th, but it's a little bit stark to see it in a courtroom, I guess.
I like Jared did. I saw a few clips of the Israel response, and I do see in the chat that people that saw it said that Israel mentioned how they were Holocaust survivors and that they were victims of Hamas. I wouldn't expect anything different from Israel, in this setting. Um, when it comes, like Jared mentioned, when it comes to propaganda, I mean, they understand that they have a PR problem at this point, and so they're doing everything that they can to kind of change that. It's obviously not working, in my opinion, but it's to bring up the Holocaust. Obviously, is a method to gain sympathy, right, and not acknowledge their role in the settler colonialism and the displacement and genocide of Palestinians. Let's bring up something that we all know that the Jewish community went through in the Holocaust. Let's center that instead of responding to the real allegations of Palestinian genocide.
Yeah, I watched some of it. The Israel part was pretty nauseating and hard to get through. I think, I mean, yeah, it was. I watched parts where they were like, well, Hamas, so on and so forth. I think I was thinking when I was watching some of it, like Zionists are like what they say Black people are, like they're stuck in the past. They always play victim. They don't take any responsibility for anything. They play the race card as in the anti-Semitic card. They are always using an atrocity to justify their actions today. Like everything they say that Black people do, even though this is not true, like this is literally what they do, right? So, but as I think it was already said, excuse me, that's to be expected. So it'll take several years. I think about 4 years if they go through with it, with the genocide charges, to convict of it or to actually come to a conclusion, I should say. And then there's already laws in place that they can invade the Hague effectively if we're trying to take Israel to trial. I think it's helpful, even if it's not going to be the main thing that brings it down. I don't think any of us are confused about the failure of international law or whatever that's supposed to mean. But I think it does raise a contradiction. It does like force more people to have to grapple with the issue, and then even isolate some of the Western nations who you've noticed, like the French, said we have nothing to do with this, which I found to be funny. Like as far as the genocide trials. So I think it may eventually push other people to the other, to consider to come out of this. I think when this first happened, there was people talking about what would be the number as far as people dead that would draw the line. And I think a lot of people had a lower number, right? So people thought it would be 10,000, maybe 5,000. Now we're up to 20. Some reports say even 30,000. So it makes you wonder if there is a number. I don't think there is. But I do think with the resistance, with what's happening with the unions, I think these are things that give us hope more so than the court or any kind of law.
Yeah, right on. Piper, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I don't think I have more to add. I think I, affirm everything I've heard. I did see something about Ricky had a question.
Yeah, I got it saved. Okay. We'll definitely get to it. And and I do want to I speak. I saw Ricky saying she's on her way to the rally. Shout out to those who are rallying in DC this morning on behalf of the Palestinians. And of course, I know we're going to get to it, but I just wanted to say initially, as soon as possible, rest in power to Seiku Odinga, and we got to continue to free them all and free the future ones, and pay respect to the OG superheroes. So please check Millennials Are Killing Capitalism's tribute to Seiku recently. The one RSTV did with Kalanji and all the others that I'm not remembering and have missed. Please check all that out. In fact, I heard from Daruba this morning, and he's very appreciative of all the support that BPM has given him and to his former comrade, his lost comrade. And we'll be looking to hear from Dhoruba again soon and others. So, and I know Seiku's homegoing is tomorrow. So we'll see what comes out of that as well. But just shout out to all of those struggling in these respective lanes. So, but yeah, that.
I just want to say quickly, because you said a tribute, and ours is actually not that. It was an interview that we did with them back in like 2019 or something like that, 2020.
Right.
And
I also am thinking of, it was actually the one you were doing on behalf of Kwesi Balagoon that kind of segued into a sort of an impromptu tribute to Seiku. So I'm conflating a number of things, but just check out all of Mac Capitalism and these relative. Yeah, sorry about that, but thanks for that.
No, and you all have, I think, some of the best content related. I mean, that Soldier Stories interview that you all have with him, Dhoruba, and Blood McCreary, rest in power to Seiku and Blood McCreary. I mean, that is, an amazing, document. So I think, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Jared, did you want to add anything about, you didn't really...
No, I haven't. I and blissfully, I admit, I'll talk about it later, have been in an intellectual pastoral these last 48 hours. So I've had a selfish, wonderful break from all of this and am behind on some things and just, but other than when we went through, you and I, Renee, went through the South Africa's set of charges, what could Israel say but what they haven't always fallen back on? So I have to admit, I haven't watched it, I haven't read what their response is, but I'm pretty sure it's, what is it, rinse, wash, repeat, or stamp and change a date or two, and, because what are you going to say? And then and specifically to that 9 pages in that South Africa report dedicated to Israeli state official statements on, let's wipe them all out. I mean, what...
And honestly, that's pretty much what they did. And I think that's part of why I'm having such a hard time. I might just go to the double speed rewatch. And it's my own need to know for myself what was said and not to take it from other people. It's like my intention of making sure that I'm very clear on when I speak on something, speaking on it because I am fully aware of what it was that was said and not because I got it secondhand or through somebody else. But it really did very much turn into, those were all taken out of context, right? Anyone who said anything that made it sound like genocide, it's because it was taken out of context and it's all about Hamas. I mean, if you played a drinking game with the word Hamas during their statements, you'd be falled out on the floor. You probably couldn't even got through the first 30 minutes. And it's just, it's exactly what I expected it would be, but still hearing it is disturbing, right? Like, even though I knew what was coming, to actually hear it play out was like, wow, they're really doing, like, this is really what they're going to do. They're really going to move forward and just pretend like everything it's all lies and you don't see what you think you see. They had a whole thing. There was a woman who got up there and talked about how much water they're bringing in and how much oil they've released, and they're not actually blocking the roadways. And, I follow a lot of Palestinians who are in Hassa on Instagram showing live feeds of what is happening right now, where they're standing. And I'm like, okay, so you just want me to believe that what you said in court is the truth, right? Not what I'm actually literally watching happen in front of my eyes. And I posted on Twitter and I was like, what happens when these attorneys just stand up in a court and just lie, right? Like, is there a ramification for that? Like, is something going to be said? Is something going to be, is somebody going to say, yo, that was just a lie. It was just a lie. And it was just a lie. And that's it. It was just a lie. So, you know, if does everybody have anything else they want to add? Because I want to make sure we don't run out of time, and I want to make sure we can cover some stuff.
Because we don't mess with warrior class around here.
No.
So just let's just be clear.
Nope.
We got
Not
a
at all.
hard out at 12:57. Yeah.
All right. So I sent this morning to Jared some clips of the things that I feel like could help us kind of talk about where the things that are most pressing for me in this conversation. And I don't want to say pressing like that, but the things that came up in my mind as I was watching that interview on EY, or that conversation on correction, since it wasn't an interview. So the first one at 2:30 is this conversation about when people go to these channels, these more popular channels that, you know, have a huge viewership, like what is it that the host of the channel thinks they're coming there to see? So this is FD's explanation of that.
Perception of what we do, both internally and by our fans. Our fans think that they're participating in action and pragmatic direct action by watching our content. And if you watch me, I consistently try to critique and draw into contrast that as not being the case. And so a lot of my words, I don't want it to be construed. I don't know enough about the actual radical organizing or not so radical organizing going on independent of the online left to critique it. That critique is for myself, Cornbread Tube, the Greater Bread Tube, half the people I follow on Twitter, you know what I'm saying, the influencer culture. Because if there's one thing I think that I'm really confident on is that the influencer culture of the online left needs to kind of check itself. It needs to do better about stepping back from certain conversations, or at least amplifying other people with better, more informed takes on these discussions.
I mean, I think it's interesting that anybody would watch YouTube and think that's a political action, but okay. We'll leave that out there. But what do y'all think about this idea of this assumption of what people are coming to channels to pull from that particular channel, and how much should you be guided by what you think people are coming to see versus what you want people to see when they get there, right? What do y'all think?
I just quickly, I actually think he makes a good point on that. I agree with that point. In the same way, in the mainstream world, I think people watch, if they wake up in the morning and watch CNN or MSNBC and then go to work, or if they read the New York Times, they feel like they're informed. They feel like they've committed a political act. They feel like they've involved themselves. So I absolutely think that to the left of that, the same thing happens. And I'm guilty of it too. When I watch some of the people on the screen, if I spend a day watching their stuff, I feel like I've contributed, I've participated, and I know that's insufficient. I know it's not real, but I absolutely believe people fall into that. Yeah.
I could start us off. I mean, I'll just say, like, yeah, I mean, I agree with what he's saying, and there's contradictions to me in some of the way he lays it out. And I'd be clear, I've not watched his programming, so I can't, it's hard for me to engage what he says there versus like his content. So I don't have any critique or anything of his content because I haven't, checked it out. But I do think, there's definitely plenty of people who are what I've critiqued before as sort of left pundits, right? And so you promote yourself as a person who has answers, ideas, direction, inculcate people with knowledge, and that this is a way, I think, that people often build large platforms by doing this. Look, you can come to me for answers. I'm going to break this down to you. I'm going to tell you what this is. I intentionally, and I think we intentionally in our program have always tried to avoid that directly by bringing on people who actually do study things more deeply, or whose experience informs their their take and their politics, right? And so I do think there's something to it. I think the tricky part is like, you know, you're, and I don't want to say like we don't have any role, right, as influencers, even though I certainly don't think of myself as an influencer. I do realize that people come to us, right? They check us out, they pay attention to what we say, what we do, etc. So I do take that responsibility. But I do think also, yeah, there's an ego thing and there's a celebrity culture thing around, a lot of these shows, that I think is actually like very counterproductive. And to the point about political action, yeah, I largely agree. I mean, I don't think that watching content, but I will say this is like I do think it's important that people engage in all types of political education, and usually that needs to be done with a group of people, of comrades, of organizers, of activists, etc. But it's important for us to, to develop our consciousness and our understanding in order to act, and not just act without any sort of, political framework or consciousness. And so I do think that shows that engage that in a politically principled way can be a part of that. But I think there are plenty of people out there who just consume left-wing, quote unquote, content of various kinds, and it is just like a product. And that is something that has deeply, for me, been something I'm constantly like reflecting on and self-critiquing of like, I don't want us to ever become just something that people feel like they can consume and then go about their day, and that is some sort of political action.
Yeah, I totally agree with Jared. Just the idea of uh, why people, tune into these platforms. I mean, to be honest, obviously it is entertainment for many, and it's not necessarily a bad thing because obviously to pull people in, you should be, somewhat entertaining with your message, but not to let that overshadow what the true message is. I think that in a lot of cases, something that can start off as, I'm watching this show because it's entertaining and they're speaking of things that they're inspiring me to learn about different topics, subjects, and what's going on in the world. I think the more they consume that content, for some it may inspire them to be more active locally and join an organization, but for some it'll never do that. It'll always be just something that they're entertained by, something that they in some cases make themselves seem like they're more I guess aware of what's going on than the next man, and have these conversations amongst their friends, but never go like really beyond that. I think there's as far as the responsibility of what we have, we have to obviously do our best to be as accurate as possible with the information that we give, to be able to be sincere in our intent. Jared mentioned the idea of what happens whenever people see you in front of a screen, the celebrity type of thing, which you know, as we know, the huge platform, they there is a level of celebrity worship involved with a lot of these huge platforms, to where the message may be lost at times, and the imagery of the person is what people are focused on. And so I mean, it's a double-edged sword. I think it just all depends on the individual. If some people that constantly consume content like this, like I said, I feel like it may inspire them to read more, to learn more, to organize or be a part of an organization, to do more things locally. For others, it's always going to be a thing for entertainment. It's just like, you know, uh, somebody watching CNN or Fox News, right? Just because they watch CNN and Fox News doesn't mean that they are necessarily going to get out there and do any type of organizing or add on to any organization. Political banter can be entertaining for many, and so I think it just all depends on the individual.
And I think for me, like, that's the key, right? Like, if all you, and this is my opinion, if all you do is watch, I personally cannot call that activism, right? Like all you're doing is watching someone else give you information. Now, you can consider it like learning, I guess, or, you know, gaining a different perspective or however it is. But if you don't turn around and then do something with that information, then there is no active anything happening, right? Like if all I do is watch Pendleton 2 and say, wow, I really learned a lot about that situation, but I don't turn around and do a screening where I bring people in to have a conversation and then actually physically give people paper and envelopes with labels and stamps on them so that they can turn around and write to the Pendleton 2 so that they can understand that they're getting engaged with more people, so they can feel a little, even if only 2 people took those envelopes and did it, that's 2 more people that reached out to those brothers and gave them something, right? So if I don't do that part, there was nothing active about my just watching the documentary. You know what I'm saying? So, and that's me, right? That's my own personal, so I have a hard time, I think. I feel like part of the reason that I agreed to do this and I, you know, do all this like background research every week is because I want to give people information, but I want them to use that information to do something, right? Like if all you're doing is coming here on Saturdays and you're watching and you're getting the information, I mean, that's cool, I guess. But if you're not going to turn around and bring that information back to an organization or do something in the community with it, or try and like read some more on your own, or, you know, as Harim always says, you got to read, beloved. Like if you're not really going to truly engage in something that's going to move towards something, I just, you know, I don't see, like, you can call it education, I guess, but activism, you know, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, just wanted to add on one more thing. I agree. It's not necessarily activism. One thing I do want to keep in mind, though, one of the questions that I ask new guests that I have on the show is, uh, what sparked you on your journey for either like knowledge itself or becoming radical? Because I like to hear those stories, and I like the audience to hear those stories, because I feel like we can play a part in that, process for someone, because you never know anyone's level of understanding or education or how they even found your platform in the first place, right? And so I never want to assume anyone's level of understanding about certain things. So for somebody that may have never heard about many of these ideas that we speak on our platform, somebody that may never heard of real critique of capitalism, or just finding out about what Western imperialism is and how it destroys the planet. These different conversations that we have may be new conversations for some people. And so, like, again, I think sometimes it's a process, right? Uh, them tuning in to Two Black every week, or them tuning in to EYL or Black Power Media, them tuning in every week, I think it can inspire them to go out and do things locally, inspire them. Brother Diallo says all the time, revolution is an intellectual endeavor. Inspire people to read more, inspire people to learn more and be more aware of these subjects. And I feel like during that process, I think that would motivate most people to want to become more active. I've gotten, over the few years that I've been doing the show, I've gotten a few emails of people around the country, and about just having people on like Dr. Ball, and what it's inspired them to pick up and read, and what it's inspired them to do locally. Uh, and so some people will take that and run with it. Others will be fine being entertained. I think regardless to whom or what, we have to keep on being sincere in our message, be intentional in our message, and whatever we can do to inspire those to get active, we must continue to do that.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is I think what's important is affirmation as well. I think that having different voices on the left helps people to feel affirmed. I think I work with a lot of young people, as you do too, and I think like a lot of, well, I'm speaking more from like working with young people, and I think like the more that they're able to see voices that kind of replicate mainstream media but have a different content can help them like help affirm, the ways in which they could see the world differently. And so I know like I share a lot of the content from here, and then I know Dr. Ball has said that his students share all types of content, but I've noticed like with young people that I work with, that they're looking for content that they can relate to, and they might not relate to me, right? I'm 52 years old almost, right? Like, but they might relate to FD, right? And he might be saying some stuff that's adjacent. And I don't know. I feel like it's important to grow our movements, and I think the media does, or alternative media, Black media does play a role in helping us grow our movements and grow the consciousness of our people. And it might need to be entertaining to reach some people. It might not be enough for those who are well read and might see it as mundane or nonsensical, who are at a certain level. But I think that it's important for us, as we're continuing to grow our movements, that people do feel affirmed, and I think that it provides affirmation.
Yeah, I'll say lastly, I think I'm trying to think how to get into it. I think it's part of the process. So I think Jared said it earlier. It's important to know. It's important to be informed about what you want to get involved in, right? So it's not. I don't think we should create this dichotomy where it's either you're active or you're just watching. I think that's not really how life works. You tend to want to be involved in things as you learn, right? Like sometimes you probably do just need to sit in front of a screen or in front of your minister or in front of a speaker or whatever you're doing. You probably don't need to necessarily be the one to just run at something. You need to learn. At the same time, I think, especially for me coming out of like the spoken word world and poetry, there is a tendency sometimes to think that by consuming some positive message or some radical message, that's the end point. And I've seen that very directly on, you get on stage, a bunch of people clap, you get the direct affirmation right there. The people are right in front of you and everybody's like, that was deep or whatever. And then that's really how it ends, and it really is just entertainment in that sense. Cause I like that piece and it might've affirmed this, or it might've given me a vibe on that. But, we're out here, we're chilling. We're not really trying to act on. And I think part of why I became a little jaded about that world was because that's what it became. It was just the side of struggle was the stage, not what you were saying on the stage. It was the stage itself. So the side of struggle was to make, or the stage became the side of struggle, and therefore it became how radical could you be on that stage? How radical could your poem be? How radical could your song be? How much could you amp people up on stage? And if anyone goes to like a slam poetry, not a big fan of slam poetry, but anybody goes to like a slam poetry event, you see that's half of the work, is just how dramatic, how traumatic, how radical can my poem be next to the other person to get me to a 10, right? And I'm using this as an example because I think sometimes this is what happens online. Like the side of struggle is simply just, how can I outflank the next person? How can I shit on the next person? How can I somehow appear more radical than the next person? Based on whatever arbitrary measurement we're using. Is similar to judges in a poetry slam. It's kind of whatever the judges think makes it a 10. There's no real consistent, scale. It's just like, all right, that's a 10. And often, having been in these spaces, coming back to poetry, the judges ain't never been in no poetry slam, so they don't even know what the fuck to expect, excuse my French, so it's just like, so sometimes you get online and you hear people saying shit and you're like, man, that's deep or that's radical, but you don't even know anything, right? And then you get gassed up, and then now you riding for this person, and it's me versus this channel, because Dr. Ball got beef with somebody, so now I got beef with them, right? Like it's never about the actual thing. So I think sometimes people do get caught up in the performance itself, and it's not necessarily about the thing. Now, I don't totally put that on the audience. Honestly, I put a lot of that on the host, or I put that on even more broadly speaking, YouTube, the algorithm, capitalism. You know, we can go down any of those roads, but the audience can get gassed up, and now it's just about the flag of a YouTube page or whatever podcast you listen to, you know, and it reinforces itself with the host. Like, so I say something, everybody's like, hell yeah, I feel that way too. So I don't even have to investigate whether I know what I'm talking about, and it just becomes, you know, cyclical in that sense. So I think, you know, if hosts are serious, there needs to, you know, you have to be connected to some kind of work. Like, to use one last example, when we the Pendleton 2, or the Defense Committee for the Pendleton 2, you know, those are 2 political prisoners, you know, John Batherwell Cole and Christopher Naeem Trotter, here in Indiana. You know, I reached out to FD, since we're talking about FD, to, you know, try to infuse content about the Pendleton 2 into some of his videos, and thankfully he was willing to do it. So we were able to get the documentary uploaded to one of his pages, where we get the documentary included in a video, or at least the story included in the video that's almost at 1 million views, the Fuck the Police video. And that's because we're connected to doing actual work on the ground. And, you know, he was sympathetic to that. Some of these people are not, because we did email other, you know, high-end influencers who did not respond to us. I won't say who those people are. So, you know, we appreciate, you know, FD for we appreciate FD for giving us the platform. But I'm saying, you have to also, if we want things to be more than just about the stage, coming back to that point, then we also have to hold the hosts accountable, and the hosts have to hold themselves accountable. And accountable can't be an abstract word. We have to have organization. We have to have actual principles we can agree on, and things of that nature. And we have to push each other in that sense. But you have to be able to come to people with something tangible. It can't just be a critique all the time. Sometimes I think you need to say, hey, there is this actual thing happening. What about that? You know, or there is this thing you can get connected to. What about that? Not just, you didn't say this, because then that just reinforces the same kind of like, oh, you weren't radical enough for me as a viewer type of thing, right? Like, at some point there needs to be a connection to things that are happening, if the point is to actually do anything, which I often don't know if that's the point, but if that is the point, yeah.
But how are we going to have a conversation about YouTube responsibility and you're not going to name the names? How are we going to?
This becomes part of it. If I call somebody out, to be honest, it's not gonna be taken the way it should be. It's gonna turn into, oh, 2 Black came at so and so. Oh, BPM has beef with so and so. So I'm not saying you shouldn't name names. That's not always my thing, but I'm not against naming names. But I think because of the environment, even when you say it, it doesn't become about like the thing. So if I say, yo, you didn't deal with the Pendleton 2, go attack them about that. Don't make it about BPM versus this person, you know what I mean? Or BPM versus this channel. But more than often, it'd be that. And nobody gave a shit about the Pendleton 2, right? Like, on either side of it. It's just about this person versus that person. So I think we have to be able to direct people back to the thing that actually matters. And I think sometimes getting into these personality battles also just reduces how we understand it, because then it's just like, okay, this person didn't do something, and it just becomes a moral failure of an individual, as opposed to a general ecosystem that is really just trash as far as what we call the so-called online left in general.
But I still think it's principled to name the names and then let us act principally in our response and interpretation. No, but in all seriousness, I just wanted to add that your point about the one-up personship and all of that stuff. By the way, it happens all the time at academic panels, all the time. The most radical scholars talk the most radical-ish on every, so that happens all the time. It even happens at activist events too, where the microphone gets passed and everybody is trying to compete because I think, as I heard 2 Black you saying it, they want to locate their revolutionary behavior in that moment.
And nobody wants to be embarrassed, right? So you're like, well, I read that shit too, so yeah, we can talk about blah blah blah. Like, everybody does that. I've seen that. You know, one time I was on a panel, I was doing someone a favor. I did not enjoy this panel, but it was for the Black Panther, what was that shit, Wakanda Forever or something. doing some of their favorites locally. I got off as soon as I could, but like there was I actually tried to prepare a statement, so I think I said something. I actually critiqued it. I even used some of Dr. Ball's critiques, and everybody was just there to celebrate. But then all of a sudden they felt guilty. So they're like, yeah, capitalism and yeah, the black. And it was like, none of y'all give a shit about this, man. You know, like y'all just don't want to sound stupid, right? Like that's the, you know, so thankfully I was able to get off there like shortly after that. But it was just saying like, that's the kind of energy you get where people are trying to, you know, demonstrate some kind of, you know, I guess bona fides or whatever. And it's not really about whatever the hell we talking about. That's really a proxy for you to just prove yourself, you know.
But something you said in there about like the honesty and vulnerability, I think like, you know, as a Gen Xer and, you know, just in my lifetime, we hadn't been afforded that luxury, right, to be wrong. I'll say, especially as a Black woman, it, you know, the fear of like not being right, or the fear of like not, you know, having the answer. And I think like in new media, I think I'm going to call it a luxury, or I don't know, is the ability to just name like, I don't know, you know, I don't have the answer. I think that you know, in terms of responsibility, you know, I see that a lot here, and I try to practice it myself, I think. And then also too, like the naming of sources. I think there was a show Renee did, got so fed up about somebody not naming sources, but you know, I think, you know, it on YouTube specifically, a lot of people are like these talking heads and try to, you know, make this perception like how much they know or how well read they are, especially a lot of folks I, you know, follow who may, you know, be in like academic spaces. But I do I love how on this new media that folks are able to like, you know, share their sources, you know what I mean? And share the sources widely, or even critique the sources, you know what I mean? Like name that, you know, or be very critical of the sources, and name the parts of the sources that they disagree with. And that might have been a practice like strictly in academia, but if like in these hip hop streets, or, you know, that has not, you know, historically been like a cultural norm. So that's something that, you know, moving forward, I think, you know, is a really important part of like, you know, responsibility. It's like being able to critique the sources and being self-reflective and being able to pull back like, oh, I thought this was how I was thinking before, but I was wrong. Like being able to name like when you maybe didn't have the right, you know, take on something, and being able to, you know, have the humility to be like, oh, you know what, I was, you know, this is what I thought about that, but I don't, you know, maybe I'm changing the way I'm thinking, and being able to self-correct in a moment. You know, these are things I think about when we're talking about like, you know, responsibility.
Thank you. And that's real. It's not being up here, I will say, especially since this is not, again, wasn't on my bingo card, but in choosing to do this, I realize how critical people are of you, no matter what you say and what stance you take. So I've kind of just lived with, I'm just going to say it the way I think it and the way I feel it and what I believe to be my truth in that particular, whatever topic it is that we're going over. And if people come for me, then so be it. And if I'm wrong, so be it. And I try to be honest when I don't know something, because that's the whole point, right? Like you don't know something, so you go into any topic with the intention of gaining a better understanding of what you don't know, right? Like that's the whole point. So somebody in the chat was like, oh, what's the point of all this? Read, beloved. And it reminded me why I blocked them, like when I'm on the chat side. And the point is so that you can come to a conversation with some knowledge, right? Like that's why you read. That's why you watch, if that's the method you choose. It's so you can go into these conversations not being an ignoramus, right? Like not being the person who doesn't have a clue about what you're talking about and who is waiting for Two Black to say something that like kind of nudges you to realize that you don't know what you're talking about. So then you have to circle back and try and make yourself seem like you know something. So this is perfect because it actually goes into the next piece of the conversation that I felt like, okay, so this is interesting, right? So So FD says, and this is a quote, we don't need to play this particular clip because it's short, but what he follows after he says it a little while later is what we're gonna watch next. But he says that as the content creator, what you're trying to do, and he was talking specifically about Ole's show about the voting and kind of running it back to what he does when he's pulling these shows together. And he said, quote, "You're trying to pull out the most useful, juiciest bits of what you get from your interviewee to kind of feed into the thesis you want." So I took that as him explaining that when he's doing, when he's pulling these content pieces together, that he may interview somebody for a whole hour, but end up only using 5 minutes of that entire hour because he's really just trying to pull out, the thing that he feels like is going to most support whatever it is that he's trying to explain over the course of the show. And I'll say that part of the reason I really like Millennials Are Killing Capitalism is because even though I know you edit some of it sometimes for, like if something got messed up, I assume during the show, but for the most part, it's just like an interview. It's just a whole conversation between them and another person. Like, Jared, you do the same thing. Rakeem, you do the same thing. Too Black, I know for you all, it's more put together, but it's also, it's just like, here's facts. Like, I'm just going to give you all the information. Piper's show is the same thing. So I feel like I gravitate more for audience wise to that type of show where I can just kind of see how the information flows between two people. So can we play the clip real quick? Because I want to see if we can get Too Black's feedback on this piece before in the event that he actually does have to jump.
Certain ideologies in politics and not your like last stop. And I want to introduce and create enthusiasm around certain ideas, but I can't present these ideas in their perfect form to illustrate not just the entirety of my ethos around a particular topic, but like a extremely well curated, well researched, and well defined take in general, because I have to think, how much time do I have with this person's attention span for this video? And will it be able to spread as far as it can based on how it's consumed as a product? So go ahead.
So it's funny because I'm teaching an asynchronous class right now for the winter session. And I assigned over a 3-day period a 1-hour video and a couple of in a chapter of reading. And I got this one student wrote this very long response, very long, like 5-6 severe paragraphs, all to explain to me why what I did was out of pocket. The video was too long. I don't have the attention span. You mentioned something about Chomsky. I've never read this guy. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand. Paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. And I was like, I was almost overwhelmed, but I was basically trying to say, look, you had several days. It's a 1-hour video. Watch it in 5, 6, 7-minute segments. The assignment literally included write down words and concepts you would like for us to have a discussion about on Canvas. But so just to see it's almost like on the one hand, I see FD trying to be to be a relatively responsible, popular YouTuber and talking to my student. And while my students on the other end talking to me about, I would indirectly saying in the context for today's discussion, I want to see FD's content. I don't want these videos you sending me with all these long form conversations and discussions of books and chat and all in content. Like I don't. So I don't know what I'm saying about all that. I'm just saying it just was weird to get that response the other day and then to revisit that clip there. But Too Black. And I'll let you.
And Too Black, you did say you have a couple of more minutes. So I want you to go next, but just real quick, somebody in the chat I know FD does video essays. I'm well aware. I also know that for this particular thing, Ole did a documentary. It's a 3.5-hour documentary, but it's a documentary. I get it. But she also does long interviews where she doesn't do a whole lot of clipping. Like she kind of runs the gamut. And I personally really like Olay, right? Like she looked out. She took a Uber to Jersey to like be on a panel for me. So, you know, her strong point is abolition. And so she's excellent on that topic. I don't have any issue with anything that any of these people do. What I'm trying to engage people in with this particular conversation, I wanted to be clear to the chat specifically because of some of the things I'm seeing, is I wanted to have a conversation about what does that mean as someone who is behind the camera, as you're going into these shows or conversations or whatever that you're presenting to your audience. Like, how does all of this translate to the work that you do as the person behind the camera? And what does this mean for the people who are coming to watch? You know, again, like I feel like there's room to have the conversation. It doesn't have to, I'm not trying to say like people are doing the wrong thing, but there's room to have the conversation about what it is that we actually should be doing as people who are all participating in the process in this way, as the people behind, you know, in front of the camera and speaking to an audience. So, Too Black, I'm gonna let you go first because I don't know how much time you actually have. I just know you said you had a little more time.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand. I'm responding to basically in general the question of editing clips, or I just want to make sure I understand exactly.
Like when pulling together the information. So like when you all do Black Myths, right? When you make a decision, okay, we're going to cover this topic, right? Mm-hmm. What goes into that thought process of how you clip your video, what you show, what you discuss, how do you all as a group make the decision on how you're going to present information to your audience?
I mean, as a video editor as well, and just an editor in general, I do think some things should be edited. That's just my own bias. I think some videos that are 3 hours really could be 1 hour. That's just me. I think sometimes things end up going down rabbit holes, and you know, it can be cleaned up. You know, and I don't think everybody wants to sit through 3 hours of video, to be fair. I don't knock anybody for not wanting to sit through 3 hours, even when it's our own program. Like I totally get that. But I think there's a politics of editing that's probably not talked about enough, as far as like when you are making choices that is like framed on how you kind of what you want to present, what the political viewpoint is. When you're making choices about, I'm going to keep this, I'm not going to keep that. There are some things that are just purely, you know, accidental that you just cut out because somebody got a phone call or something like that. But there are other things where it's like, that doesn't necessarily, you know, help. So if I, like for instance, on our show, if one of us does go too deeply down a rabbit hole and the conversation is just literally just hard to follow because everybody's like trying to figure it out, then yeah, we do cut that out and make it cleaner so people listening can follow the conversation better. And because for us, we are always grounded in a particular myth. So any edits I make are based upon how much does this help debunk said myth versus does this confuse the audience? Does this create, you know, some disjointment? And then sometimes we say things that just clearly aren't accurate. So because we pre-record, like I can be like, well, that's actually not what the data says, so I'm not keeping that in. Or, well, that actually contradicts the point. Or, well, we had to argue about it. And sometimes we do keep those things in some tension because people need to see people struggle through ideas. So like it's a little bit of both. It's not necessarily one or the other. Having done like documentaries as well, or particularly one documentary talking about the Pendleton 2, again, there's parts of the story of the Pendleton 2 that aren't like every literal detail they told us we didn't include in the film because some things just make it hard to follow the story in and of itself. So you're always taking, I think Stuart Hall said, you know, you're taking, if you think about it, like refining materials from the ground, like when you're editing, you're always taking raw data, raw material, and you're refining it a little bit, you know, to present that to the audience. You're not simply just throwing it out there when you're editing. I don't think that's necessarily a problem in all cases, but I do think, again, there's a politics to it. So you can fall into a thing where I'm clipping this because I know more people are going to watch this than that. and that might sometimes sacrifice the actual message that you could make in that particular instance. So I'm going to use this clip of somebody saying something wild because I know that's going to go viral or that's going to get more attention. But maybe somebody explaining something a little deeper or breaking it down, I'm not going to keep on here because, you know, that's not going to sell as well, right? So there's always a choice that you're making. And I think we just need to be more critical about those choices. But I do think those choices need to be made, but we just need to understand that those choices exist and we need to have more conversation about what needs to be done with those choices.
Yeah, I would say that well, a couple of things that come to mind. So FD does acknowledge himself as an entertainer. So I think that kind of is a thing. But I would also say that, you know, we've like now in this whole media landscape, the ways in which people even consume media, you know, some especially like with these short clips, like some people don't even go to the long form. Some people just go to the 30-second shorts or, you know, reels or whatever. And possibly like that's their whole, you know, interaction. But then I guess a whole nother tangent that I think about is like as a creator, something I'm always thinking about and always sensitive of as an able-bodied person is people that that are not able to fully consume media in the way that it is made, right? Like people who do not have sight, right? Or even people's different comprehension levels, you know, neurodivergence, you know, sometimes people just don't have the capacity to what we would call pay attention. Or maybe their way of paying attention is, you know, is just not the way in which we are able to quote unquote pay attention. Anyway, it's probably said the same thing. So as when I'm making media, so sometimes I make different types of media. Like I started doing where I sit and take an article and I read the article and go through the article. I've gotten criticism about that, but then there's other people who are like, oh, I appreciate that you went through the article because it would be difficult for me to read the article. And I struggle. Like I remember I said some word weird and Big Teal was like, what the hell? But you know, but I think like what I appreciate about Black Power media is being able to have the different types of hosts on the show, right? Like we've got people on here who are, you know, really seasoned at this, and then we've got people who are just, you know, new and everything in between. And so I think, you know, as we're thinking about like making media for our audiences, I like to also reach back to the audience. Like I read the chat a lot in my, you know, what I do, and I've gotten feedback that that's annoying. Like, you know, stop reading the chat, you know, stop going to the chat. But then there's people who are loyal to the chat, who are appreciative, you know, that I acknowledge the chat and bring the chat in. So I think, you know, there's different audiences, there's different attention spans, and it's going to be continuing to change, especially as we have a lot of this short form video. But I mean, I would love to see Black Power media have like children's programming, you know, cartoons, you know, gaming. So anyway, I think I think having different types of media to, I want to say, like feed those different media appetites. I'm always interested in like how we're gonna grow, and I think like as a person who creates content, that's something I'm always thinking about. Like, how do I make this content so that I'm actually making an impact and I'm actually engaging, you know, people. But anyway, I'll land the plane right there.
I just want to say very quickly, in part learning some things from FD himself, that to do some of what Piper is talking about and expand, we would really have to reorganize the whole channel and the whole platform and start dividing things up because the algorithm doesn't, if the goal is to reach the largest audience, the algorithm doesn't like the way BPM is doing things. All these different shows with different topics and different levels of popularity, it's not helpful to the whole. So that's for me one of the things constantly trying to work out, and try to strike that balance between doing what I know I want to do versus what would be the most popular without, but
I think like the way I personally prepare for a show, it doesn't allow me much room for editing, because it's more of a conversation, and I want people to see the conversation, the flow of the conversation, the rhythm of the conversation, and to be able to extract, like the way I craft, do my best to prepare as best I can for each interview. And so I go into it with a goal of being able to extract as much knowledge and information and keep it entertaining, that I can from each guest. I have uh, interviewed people from all various backgrounds with expertise in a lot of different things, anything from the origin of hoodoo and African martial arts to capitalism, right? And so I have to go into each show crafting my questions in a way where I feel like, okay, this is going to have a good flow to it. Unless somebody goes really off the rails, I try to leave the conversation itself intact. There are things that I edit as far as intros, outros, and things of that nature, but I try to leave the conversation intact. Like Two Black said, I mean, sometimes it's good to see people go over ideas, even be corrected at times. I mean, none of us are all knowing. I think there's a certain level of being human in that, to be like, oh, you know what, I never thought about that. That's something that I'll go back, when the show is over, and read more about. We're in a time now where there are a lot of people within these YouTube spaces, whether it's a quote unquote leftist space, a quote unquote conscious community space, where they have to present themselves as all knowing and infallible and can never be wrong. This is part of the ones that I consider grifters. This is part of the grift, where in order to keep this idea of who they are, they can never be seen as was mentioned earlier, I haven't read that book, or you don't know what you're talking about, type of thing. Where I strive to, hey, if I don't know anything, and there are plenty shows that I've done where I'm learning with the audience, as far as who I'm interviewing, and the information that's being brought. I think there's nothing wrong with that. The idea of hey, we're all in this together. We all have different levels of understanding about different topics. You know what I mean? Let's take this ride. Let's take this journey together. And that conversation that I put out is part of that journey, is part of that ride. I do understand. I do struggle with the idea sometimes of, hey, should I make clips, and should I, there are plenty of YouTube channels that, even FD, he has a clips channel that's, videos 20 minutes long compared to his other videos that are anywhere from an hour to 2 hours long. I do struggle with that sometimes. I don't have an answer personally for my own page. I do know, obviously during these days and times, technology is designed to keep our attention spans. And it's kind of like, I look at it sometimes kind of like, do you prefer singles from your favorite artists, or do you prefer albums from your favorite artists? We're in a time where some people literally can't, a new album drops, they can't sit down and listen to the whole album in its entirety, right? Like it was, like, I may be showing my age here, but that's how we used to do, right? We would listen to the album, we would take the CD booklet, look, oh, who produced that? Who made what's that sample? That kind of thing, right? Now put the single on a playlist and go from there. And so I strive to be somebody that makes the album, right? And for the people that are into that, this is my show is for you. For the people that want the hot takes, it's not really that's not really what I do. I'm not a hot take type of person, right? I like the conversation. I like the conversation to have a rhythm, to have a flow. I've never went to school for any type of journalism, and I don't even consider myself a journalist, but I do feel like in order to do this and be successful in these spaces and to get their message across uh effectively, you should learn about different you know things within the science of journalism that you can use to add on and make the conversation smooth, to make the conversation have a flow. Ethics. What are we striving to do? What is the information that we are striving to get across? And so, like, to land the plane here, it's for me, it's all about just that conversation being an experience. Whether no matter what we're talking about, hopefully, the audience can pick a few things away from it that they may want to study on their own. Something that, to make information, like as KRS-One used to say, edutainment, because it's important, and YouTube, hey, if you watch the first 30 minutes and have to do something, you can come back to it and pick up right where you left off. That's the beauty of it. So like I said, I strive to I don't do much editing as far as the actual conversation. I feel like it's extremely important for people to see how these dialogues work organically, right? Because these are the same conversations that you may have in an organization. These are the same conversations that you may have when it comes to your immediate cipher, whether your friends and family. And so I strive to keep it that way, just to let people in and see how these things work, what it looks like to learn on the fly. So
I mean, a lot of what I would say would overlap with what Rakeem just said. I mean, I think a couple of things that I would say in terms of our approach is like, I mean, this attention span question is really interesting to me, and I think that it's what he's talking to about is very real. And I do think that if your desire is to reach hundreds of thousands and millions of people, then you do have to pay attention to the things that he's talking about. So I think that anything that I say is not to dismiss that point because I think he's correct. I also think that's a problem. Like, I think that it's, I don't think that the ideas that we seek to engage and convey on our platform can be conveyed in 30 seconds or 90 seconds or 20 minutes. Um, and so there's a role, I think, for work that does those things. I've done clips before to try to get people into listening to whole conversations, etc. Some of that on our end is just a resource thing. Like if we had more people who had more time and more money to edit stuff and get it out, we probably would do more of that. It's not actually like a political choice against making clips or making shorter segments or things like that. I think that there's definitely a role for that and a value to that. But I am concerned about younger generations. And like the lack of it, the inability to watch a 100 or a 1 hour video or read an essay. And I think that that's a very real thing. And I can't relate to that at all as somebody who grew up when I did and had to read a ton of stuff for school that was like just inordinate amount of reading that was actually quite oppressive on some level of like, you got to read 3 or 4 books this week, and write a 30-page essay or whatever, and so it's that's where my old man shaking his fist at the cloud like does come out, and I admit that. But I will say, um in terms of our approach, I mean, what's interesting for us is that the length of things or the editing of things has never increased the amount of people who pay attention for us. So the most watched, listened, downloaded episodes that we have done are often in the range of 2.5 to 3 hours long. And I don't know. I tend to think it's because the people who listen to that, you know, it's usually because it's good. Like usually if it's that long, it is because the person has a lot to say, and you know, you know, is very thoughtful, right? And that's why they're saying that much. Um, and a lot of our shorter content does not do well. You know, people don't share it that much. They don't tend to be that interested in. There's different reasons why that could be. I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the guests and things like that, you know, but um I just think that um one of my theories around it is that I do think that there are lots of people for whom the 30-second and the 90-second or the traditional 30-minute TV segment are the ways that they consume media, and that's it. I think there are a lot of folks who are like, I don't get any real information watching the news. I don't get any real information on these 30-second and I actually want to understand this. I actually want to understand this topic or learn about something. And in order to do that, it takes time, you know? And so, yeah, I agree. I think Rakeem said it, you know, some folks do just watch for 20 minutes, and I get that. I do that all the time, you know, and then I'll come back to it later if it was really captivating to me and I want to finish it. And I think that's probably traditionally the way people consume our show. And some folks do listen, I'm sure, for 5 minutes and leave or, you know, whatever. Um, so I don't know. I mean, I do think that our platform and the way we do things will never reach a certain level of success. It will never have as many viewers or as many whatever as the stuff FD does, because he's very conscious about that issue. And you know, I do think that there's value in people who try to engage that work in a principled way and who are you know, willing to uplift projects like, you know, the work of the Pendleton 2 that Two Black and others are doing and stuff like that. And so it's not, to me, a knock on that at all. And I think if I viewed our work as entertainment, then I probably would think a little bit more about that. I actually don't at all think of our work in the vein of entertainment. And that's not to knock people who do either, or that, you know, shout out to KRS-One and edutainment. Like I do understand the value in striking that kind of balance. But for our work, it was never really about that. It was really about trying to create an archive of you know, history and knowledge that people could delve into when they wanted to really learn about things. And to say again, to a point that Rakeem said, it, we don't know, you know, we go into these books and read them. So it's not like we're, you know, a lot of this show, even initially for us, was like, there's a lot of things that we want to learn about, and it would be selfish of us to just learn about them ourselves when we could share that learning process with other people and develop some kind of community around that. And that's the last thing I would say, is that I think for us, one of the really valuable things has been engaging with our audience and like learning from them and connecting with them and building political relationships around that. And then that actually also disciplines the content in certain ways, because people say, you don't cover enough of this, you should cover that, you should check this out. You know, you said this last episode, I disagree. Here's somebody who refutes it. And that actually then develops the project, I think, in ways that it would not develop if it was just, you know, me and Josh. So
I wanted to say one quick thing. I will say this isn't necessarily a disagreement, just offering more opinion, I guess. But I think presentation does matter, whether you call it entertainment or not. You know, I think sometimes there's a tendency sometimes, I think, to just be like, well, this is the real shit, or this is the black radical this, or this is the, you know, but it's like the way you present things. I say this as a poet, as a filmmaker, like that does matter. There's a difference between how you put words together, how you put things on the screen, and having some style and some presentation and being somewhat interesting, you know, versus just rolling anything out there. And I don't think anyone on this panel is saying that, but I think there are times when you watch certain content and you can just tell there's not a lot of effort put into it. You know, beyond just the lack of research that people may have, but even just the actual visual or the way things sound, having a mic, like all these different things do matter, and having quality. Like, I don't want dusty, you know, black radicalism or dusty communism. Like I wanted to have some quality, you know. So I think I think that is important, as opposed to just falling into this extreme where it's like, well, that's the real thing. It's like, you know, you see this in, you know, I think the brother brought up you know, music, and you know, you can like I like the album single like breakdown. I think that's dope. But I also think sometimes, you know, I know going back in the day to like underground rap, you know, they be like, well, this is the real shit, so you just gonna get it how you get it. It's like, yeah, but you still probably could have cleaned up that audio though, bro. You know what I mean? Like you still didn't, it didn't have to sound like that. Like you could have been a little bit more diligent on this and that. So I think, you know, discipline and just putting a good presentation together is important. Now, entertainment is a different question because that brings in other factors beyond just a quality. That's about a presentation that you know is going to reach a specific audience. It's going to open you up to a particular type of market, and that's a different way of thinking about things. And I think that's a little more difficult to navigate. But I don't want anybody listening to get the impression that you don't need to have polished work, and that it's just kind of like, you know, well, since we talking about Black history, it is what it is. It's like, no, you should still cut certain things down. If you're burping on the mic, we don't need to hear that. You know what I'm saying? Like there are just certain things that you can clean up. Like it don't have to be just anything goes, right? And I think sometimes that is a tendency that we can lean on because we're like, well, we're telling the truth. And that doesn't change the fact that you still got to do like quality production, you know.
100%. I'll just quickly say, because I totally agree with what you said, and that I forgot to address, because Renee, you brought up a question of what do we edit, and that's what we edit. You know, like I actually spend it on the audio way too much time, like editing on, yeah, Too Black makes fun of me, the ums and the ahs and all of that kind of stuff, because I'm like, it just takes away to me from it sounding, you know, if you're just listening to it, you want something that sounds fairly polished. And I think that that's important, especially if you're going to try to maintain somebody's attention for a prolonged period of time, that it sounds good. And I'm self-critical. Like I was listening to our interview with Seiku Odinga, and the sound quality of it is horrible, you know, and he was sick. And you know, he called in on a phone because we couldn't figure out the internet thing with him, you know, and that's a regret. I wish that interview was at a higher quality, because what he had to say was very important and moving. But I know that some people will be turned off listening to that, as I was listening to it the other day, of like the quality of this is not where it should be. And so I think it's a good example of what Too Black is talking about. And it took us a while to get to, I think, a level where stuff sounded better aesthetically and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that is important.
I just want to say I did a complete 180 on that subject. When I started doing my little mixtape radio project years ago, I was like, nah, you get it the way you get it. No labels. The audio might not work, but listen to the content. It's free. It's a philosophy. And I'm a complete 180. I think we do have to have some, and I've become almost an audio snob to a certain extent at this point. Despite my own flaws, Quaker anarchist, I hear you, sorry. But yeah, I get it. Yeah, so I agree with that part. Yeah.
I'm sorry. No, just really quick. And I agree with everybody. I think that's probably one of the reasons why FD's channel is so big, because aesthetically it looks amazing. Not only, you know, not just what he says and the content and the topics that he addresses, but I'm not sure. Which one did I watch recently? I think I watched the Bamboozled one recently, and and I believe Bamboozled, the Psychology of Coons or something like that. But just watching it, I mean, it's extremely entertaining, the way he goes in and out of clips, the way he adds his ideas after the clips come. I mean, aesthetically, I don't think you can get much better than that. And I think that is one of the reasons, obviously, why so many people find channels like that attractive. A lot goes into the production, and so yeah, shout out to him for that, because and the ability to get that message across and be that I guess aesthetically pleasing, you know what I'm saying, goes to show how much work he puts into that.
Definitely. And he says very clearly, and again, I so much respect him for this. He was like, look, I'm an entertainer, right? He said, I'm not the end point. I'm like the entry point, right? Like his goal is to introduce a topic that he, you know, and not that this is all he does, but I think when he, you know, when he goes into these topics that are a little less about entertainment and are about other things, I think his intention is to just give somebody a reason to look into it a little bit more, right? Like that's the impression that I got, at least based on what he said. Now, should that be the entry point? I don't know, right? Is it working? I don't know. Like, is it, you know, for me, it's more of a question of like, you know, is that what you're trying, like, is that what you're trying to do? Are you trying to work to get enough of an audience so that, you know, you can throw in something every now and again that can send somebody down a path of learning something that's going to be useful, that's going to push them to organize something or so forth and so on. Like, I just, you know, I really don't know, which is why I wanted to talk to people that I felt like had more of a clue. So it's 12:30, right? And we don't want no smoke at 1 o'clock. So I'm going to suggest, Jerry, that we skip my last clip and go to some of the questions, because people brought some really good points up in the chat. Sure. And I think there's some comments in there that are worth kind of, you know, with this last bit of time that we have, digging into a little bit and seeing, you know, what people think.
Well, I got to run into one of my top 5 all-time favorite rappers yesterday, Moo Fresh. Shout out to her. And I will bring up a comment from one of my other top 5, Skip Coon, a.k.a. Josephus. What's up, sir? But that's the thing, he says. They consume hours of other stuff. Only when it's this is it too hard.
Now listen.
But
the watch 90-second clips for 7 hours and then say they didn't have time to watch an hour or something. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'm telling you, if you could have seen, if I could, I wouldn't want to do it, but if I could have shown the comment that I'm talking about from this one student, this is not some random just throwing words. It is an almost well-written essay. And I was like, my guy, if you were talking about the assignment, this is a perfect answer. You just wrote.
And you have to wonder, like, do they recognize it, right? Like, sometimes, so I try my best to go back after we do the show on Saturday to go back and to read whatever comments. Now, I only do it for like the first, I think, like 24 hours, and then I stop going back because, some people. But people be writing like entire dissertations in the comment section, right? Usually, and they be wrong. Like, I'm like, did you, like, and it's on a clip.
Wait, what did he say? What'd you say?
I said usually bad dissertations.
Oh, yeah, it's terrible. And like, people do a whole thing and it's on like the 12-minute clip. And I'm like, bruh, did you like watch the whole 2-hour-long show in which like we dug into all of this? Like, go watch the whole show and then come back and talk to me about like what exactly you found that you have a disagreement with. But people don't want to do that. And it's interesting for me as a person who, you know, I want to engage in some way, shape, or form. Like I am a person who reads the chat while we're going, and I try to answer people if they ask a question and so forth. But at the same time, like, I don't want to argue with you about nonsense, right? Like, if you're gonna come and you're gonna bring some foolishness and complain about something I didn't even say, like, I don't even want to entertain that. Like, go argue with somebody who wants to spin in circles and build mental gymnastics apparatuses in their brain. Like, I have no time for that. And it might not be nice, but that's just how I feel about it. Like, I block people in the chat because I just don't have time for it. I'm like beyond over it. So, but it's an interesting thing when you think about like, what is, when people come to these spaces and they're in the chat and they're just going on about nonsense, it's not even the topic. Like, what are we doing right now? What's going on right now?
Yeah, I don't. Oh, go ahead, Jared. I think you about to say something.
Go first.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, it might sound like a snob, but I don't really acknowledge the chat. You know, like, I don't. I mean, like when we pre-record and we post the video, like people know I'll interact with the chat, but even then, I let them take care of trolls. I'm not responding to them. I'm not wasting my time with it. I think I have a whole theory that I think we would all be better off if we ignored these people. I think when I'm on Twitter and I see somebody with 300 followers that has more quote tweets than followers because people want to respond to them, I just think that's weird. Like there's someone with 300 followers said that something silly, right? They said that, you know, Israel is a freedom fighting country or something. I'm not responding to that. You know what I mean? Like it is what it is, right? Like, so I feel like a lot of times in the comments, it's just like I don't believe it really deserves any attention unless it's something that is starting to gain momentum. Then it's important to respond. But I think a lot of times things get momentum because we respond to them. You know, like if we didn't respond to half the shit that people said, I don't even think, you know, we would be talking about it sometimes. I mean, particularly on Twitter, you can watch somebody with very few followers say something, and then next thing you know, the whole timeline is responding to this sentiment, and this person within the ecosystem of Twitter was not very important. So I think we have to have our own impulse control to just really not respond to these people in some cases. Like, again, I think sometimes you got to tell people to shut the fuck up, and I think that has its place, right? But I just think that there are times when it's like, why are we even talking about this? There's so many things that I think because people know they can get a response, they are going to say X, Y, and Z. And it doesn't have to be like that. I think for our show on Black Myths, since we are debunking myths, and sometimes people hold those things sacred, you know, and Dr. Ball could speak to this particularly on anything related to Black capitalism. That is like a cult for certain people. So you're always going to have people that take that very deeply and, you know, take things out of context. And I just figure that, you know, they're going through it. And I just let them, you know, have their little personal therapy session in the comments, like or in the chat. Like I'm not really I'm not a therapist. I'm not gonna really help you work through that. I gave you the information. If you need further help, we can help you find that. But I'm not gonna really sit with you on that unless you want to come in a principled way. That's different. But if you're, saying, oh, y'all hated on Black Wall Street. This is a real thing that happened once. Y'all hating on Black Wall Street, or it's like we literally said we didn't. So we just need to stand on the analysis and let people argue with the sources. Argue with the analysis. Like I'm not gonna get in back and forth with that. I just feel like half of that is just not productive. Even if it hurts to read the stupidity that you read in chats and comments, I just think sometimes it's like, I'm not talking to you, bro.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
Like the chat, it's interesting because YouTube is new to me, right? And so it's totally different. Like nobody ever, with the podcast, I mean, probably 10, 15 over a course of 250 episodes or something, where people would reach out and say something like, that's a really critical comment or whatever. And usually those things were actually intelligent, and I needed to respond to them because there was either critique or criticism or so on. YouTube, you get, because people just come up on you randomly. Like it goes into their algorithm or whatever. And so in some ways I look at that as a positive of like, okay, actually we're connecting with some people who are not coming to us explicitly for a political purpose. And so there is a possibility for maybe not this person in the chat, but for others, that they might start to like what we do and get interested in what we're doing. So I think that's, in some ways, I see that as kind of a benefit of YouTube, is that it is a little bit more open of a platform of possibly connecting to people who, may like something similar, or they clicked on something and so somehow they got connected to what you're doing, right? The other side though is like, yeah, we get, I mean, especially because a lot of our content has been about Palestine recently, we get a lot of people who call us like terrorist platformers, like constantly. And it's sort of funny to me because I'm like, if you knew some of the people that we've platformed over the years, I mean, we know people who've been, done 30, 40 years inside for, acts of quote unquote domestic terrorism. Right. And so it's just clear to me when those folks that like they don't actually engage it at all and certainly don't understand that our political perspective completely misaligns with theirs on a lot of different levels. But the chat actually for us so far has been a positive thing because it's enabled me to like bring other questions in from the chat that I wouldn't think to ask, which I think is cool. And yeah, a lot of the people that are in the chat are folks that I've done study groups with before, or folks from your platform as well that come over to ours sometimes. And so I like that. I mean, I think that's like an aspect of the political community, even if it's just engaging in that kind of level. But yeah, there is a lot of the comments I find is more where nonsense happens usually than the chat. But the chat it does, but as Two Black says, it's kind of self-regulating because you have good folks in the chat too who will sort of deal with the other folks in the chat.
I'm wondering if we should try to do a speed round of sorts, if we want to, or if there's, if I don't know to what extent all of you are able to see the saved, the starred, highlighted chats or comments. If anybody sees one that they want to particularly respond to, just trying to be mindful of the time. And there are a number of good questions and comments, but just going back to the beginning, to the extent, I don't know if we ever really addressed this directly or fully, but what does it mean to be the online left? And for me, I just quickly define it as I do in general, which is not sufficient. But basically, I start with the left being anybody willing to go left of the Democratic Party. And I just start there. But I'll let you all, how do you all see this?
As far as, is there an online left?
Well, well, let me just read. Ricky says here, I would like, if possible, some discussion on any real viability of an online left. So I'm sorry, I didn't even do it's beyond just defining what online left is, the viability of it. And I'm always suspicious of that. And that's why, again, I keep referring back to the Glenn Ford model, which is I see our role as encouraging those already somewhat in our camp to better organize and work with one another, as opposed to try to reach the masses and expand that way. I'm not as optimistic about that, but let me stop and let you all.
Yeah, I think it's weird too when we try to like make it a silo, like the online left. I think that is kind of, I don't know if there is any viability to that in it. I think anything should be an extension of whatever the actual project is, right? So we don't look back on the era where people did newsletters and say the newsletter left. Like, we don't say that, or the newspaper left, or the Channel 6 left, or whatever, like we don't say shit like that. Like, we are like, all right.
Although I do feel like there used to be like a discussion of black left radio or left, but maybe I'm wrong. I think that's,
yeah.
Sorry,
I mean,
my bad.
I think there was some discussion, but I think it was in a different context, as far as like, we looked at newsletters as like extensions of things that were happening on the ground, not as things to themselves. And I think the online left becomes something that exists. Like, even in that conversation with FD, he was talking about how, he wants to be more informed about what actual people are doing on the ground or something of that nature. So it shows that there becomes this whole economy of people who are literally just on the left when they log online. And then I don't know what their political affiliation is when they log off. You know what I mean? So it's like, if there needs to be some like streamlining that, where if it's just online, I think, again, I'm not one of those like anti-online people or whatever. Obviously, I wouldn't be on here, so I'm not gonna play that card. But I do think there is something to be said about like marshaling that into something else, right? Like, it be an extension of other things versus this kind of like, I'm just online and on the left online, and that becomes the entire discourse of what we do, because some of the stuff that you hear on the so-called online left, you can't even go talk to people, regular, like people who are not into this. You can't even talk to them about this shit. What the fuck are you talking about? Like, really, like when I tell people who are not into some of the stuff that I see online, like, and I tell them this happened, you know, and they're like, that's a conversation, you know what I mean? they're like, y'all really talking about that? So I think online can give you sometimes it means it just becoming very like into these deep rabbit holes that half the time no one really cares about, or you haven't even figured out what step one of that issue is, and you're way deep down the line, and it's just like, yo, we just like need some food over here. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you can get very disconnected. You know, now that doesn't mean you shouldn't go deep into ideas and analyze, because we do all that on BPM and on Black Myths. So I'm not against that, but I think there are ways that can get weird. And then that can also, obviously, you know, we talked about grifting. That could become a way of like just, you know, basically just stealing money, like stealing attention, but stealing time from people. Like all of these resources going to you, you know, to build your school or to build, you know, or to build up your platform or whatever. Like it goes towards you, and it just becomes a way of kind of like laundering, you know, people's real hard-earned stuff, because it's like, well, I have a Patreon, I have this. You know, I think if people were really left, I think there should be a conversation about, you know, how to consolidate these things, how to actually marshal resources that we get from these things into things that matter. Like there should be more conversations about that, I think, even in the content itself. You know, like you have folks who are getting 40, 50,000 a month doing a podcast. That's not an exaggeration. Some people get even more than that. What are you doing with that? You know, so we're not suggesting that you can save the world all with that. But if you're getting 40 grand a month as a podcast, I don't know if it's sufficient enough for you to just provide news at that point. Maybe it is. That's a debate to be had. But I'm saying we don't even, for some people who call themselves the left, we don't get into the actual material base of that. Like, okay, so you got all this money coming in, and then you got other podcasts that have no money, or you have other people struggling. Like, what are you doing with the resources that come in? We have no data on that. It's never brought up. And the funding in general on the left is a conversation, even offline, that people are not really interested in talking about, you know, as far as how funding works and such. But I think, you know, we do need to think more deeply about like how these things connect, you know, and is BPM the thing to itself? Somewhat, yes, but it should also be an extension of things that are happening beyond BPM as well, you know.
Most definitely. I think the idea of an online left, and even it's kind of similar to the idea of the quote unquote online conscious community. Are we grouping ourselves with the known charlatans and grifters that occupy these spaces, right? How are we differentiating ourselves between you know, people that have a sincere intent and those who are there to only make that $50,000 a month from their podcast? Ricky asked a great question though. Is there an expectation people can effectively come to consciousness on their own? And that is why I kind of asked that question at the beginning of every show for the new guests of how did you come into consciousness? Because I think hearing these stories kind of gives us a great idea of maybe how things were and how things are now. A lot of times people answer, you know, somebody gave me the autobiography of Malcolm X, or you know, I read Frantz Fanon as a teenager, and or you know, just all different types of stories. People, you know, grew up with you know, maybe a mother that was an educator. So how do we take that from then to now in 2024, as far as the how we consume media is obviously a little bit different. Jared mentioned earlier, like, you know, some people saying that they have, you know, and I'm not here to criticize or knock anybody, but they have a hard time, you know, sitting down for an hour to read. You know, I don't know how. I don't know if there's an expectation that people can, you know, come into consciousness on their own. I strive to be a community-minded person. I do think that there are instances to where, you know, you may read something or may come across something just by chance that can spark your whole, that can spark your mind to want to begin to learn more. I mean, that's, you know, what happened for me personally. Was, you know, I just, as a teenager, I came across reading Malcolm, I came across Malcolm's autobiography on my own. I read it, and it was on after that, right? But I'm not sure if that can apply today with a lot of the youth and how media is consumed, what they're reading, what books are popularized within the culture, what consciousness even is, like what people feel like the online left even is. That's why we're having these conversations right now, because I don't see them as necessarily having a fixed definition at the moment. It's kind of evolving as it goes, and people's perspective of what it is may change just from their level of how they've been introduced to it and how they see their role as being a part of it. But I just it's the online left. It just gives that same vibe to me as conscious community. What does it represent? Who's all a part of this online left?
Maybe it's the two words I keep hearing: studio gangster.
Hey, but that's what I'm saying. There are some that are in there giving their real life, and there's some that are faking jacks for that $50,000 a month podcast. You know what I mean? And one thing that I use in the conversation comes up a lot. Whether it comes up more on my social media, I would say, than it does on my actual show, but. I strive not to be in a lot of mess online, but calling out grifters and that's I mean, I can't help it, man, because I feel like these people are preying on a already vulnerable community, and disguising their ill intentions, with a Black Power jacket on, right? And I really, really dislike that. I really hate that, right? Because I mean. And I'm not knocking anybody whose YouTube is their source of money, just depending on how they move and how they maneuver. I haven't made $1 off of YouTube. I do what I do because I felt like there was a spot for me to occupy in here with what I do and the experiences that I've had over the years and the connections and people that I've made. And I was like, yo, these conversations that I have privately, I might as well have them in front of somebody so it can possibly help. But this whole idea of an online left or a conscious community where we're all grouped in to this one big community where a lot of these people are bad actors, and they're not in it for the reasons that the people on the panel are in it for. It's kind of hard to, expect a certain level of people coming into consciousness on their own, by simply just depending on the content that they are consuming. I go and I'll end it here because I know we're kind of running short on time. But there's obviously an online movement where people are denying that Black people are of African descent, right? And these people are, and I don't mind naming names. Dane Calloway is a grifter. His books don't have barcodes, but he has 500,000 people following him, right? And it's giving credence to this identity crisis and self-hate of being ashamed of being who we are. We can't even think about any type of revolution or anything like that when we are afraid to deny who we are and the history of how we got here. But these people are making a lot of money. These people are cult-like figures to their followers, and the reason I call it out whenever I can is because for those people that may be on the fence, right? Whenever they see, people like this do what they do, maybe you get a few people to see the light and come, and, begin to study and engage different works for themselves to see that a lot of these people are pseudo grifters and they're only out to, make a buck off of them.
So we're yeah, I know. I'm not trying to get you cussed out, Jared. Seriously. So we
cussed out. That would be the lightest of it.
I know. And this is the trick, right? Like you have 6 people on and everybody has so much good feedback. I was excited when Piper said yes, because I honestly did not want to be the only woman on the screen. So I was like, we're gonna bring Piper on. So it's hard when you have so many people to get everybody's input. So maybe we can revisit this conversation in the future, because there's a bunch of questions we didn't get to.
Yeah.
And I really think this is it's a reasonable conversation to have about how do you move forward? Like, how do you do the calls to action? How do you engage people? How do you tell people, like, go check out BAP, go read, Black Agenda Report, go get involved in an organization? Because that's the thing I think that I get most incensed about. Like, I go in a comment and they're like, these people are just on YouTube. They don't even organize. And I'm like, did you watch the show? Did you not see the list of all the things that we encourage people to go do? Like, that's the whole point. Like, go outside, right? Like, the one thing I will agree with in everything that, between what JD said and what a lot of people say here today, is this can be an effective means to introduce a topic to a person who is interested in doing that next step, in learning something else, in reading, in trying to find another resource. If it's something they've never heard of and they happen upon a show on YouTube that talks about a thing and they're like, oh, I never heard of that. I never thought of that. Let me go find, because I know my stack of books is totally out of control because of YouTube, right? Like, every time somebody interviews an author for something, I'm like, okay, let me go read that book. So, so I would encourage people, as this is my call to action today, right? We got 4 shows on here that people can go subscribe to and go watch and go get more information from. And I would encourage people to look at some of the resources that are, available online that aren't necessarily shows, like Black Agenda Report, although they do have like a radio show that they post every month, every week, and things like that. But there's a lot of articles, there's a lot to read. Black Alliance for Peace gives a lot to read. So, I would encourage people to go find a new resource that you have not found or listened to or read or watched before that could be good for you to learn something about, something you don't already know about. So that is my call to action for the week. And we could do a quick, 20-second roundtable if people want to add to that call to action before we jump off. But thank you all for your time. Look out for our email, because I would really love to kind of circle back to this conversation at a later date.
Anybody very quick thoughts? Otherwise, I also thank you all very much. I hope we do a part 2 and 3 and 4 and on.
Pardon, thank you. This was great.
Yeah, thanks so much. Peace, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, most definitely. Thank you.
All right. Peace, everybody. Only if you're willing to fight for it. Like Fred Hampton used to say, get a quick stretch and come on back for Warrior Class. And we'll see you next week on Saturday with Renee.